Hi, it's Sherry. Welcome back to my channel, Canterbury Cottage. Recently, a viewer commented that she had received a huge box of picture frames and needed ideas for ways she could use them other than putting a picture in them. And I thought, that's a great idea. And so today's video is full of unique ideas and projects for ways you can use your old picture frames. And I guarantee there are some ideas in this video that you've never seen before. Although I'm going to be selling most of today's projects in my retail booth, there is one that I'm definitely keeping, and I wonder if you can guess which one it is. I'll tell you later. Well, let's get started. For the first project, you'll need an empty frame and some branches from your yard. Cut the branches to a length that will fit inside your frame. Make sure that a couple of the branches are long enough to reach past the top of the frame. This will add extra stability to the piece. Hot glue the branch to every spot where it touches the frame. Also use a small dot of hot glue any place where the branches overlap on themselves. Add a screw or a nail on both sides of the frame about 1/3 of the way down from the top. Stretch a piece of black florist wire across the back of the frame and twist it around the screws to hold it in place. Now you can add whatever embellishments you like. I superglued a tiny blackbird to the wire. I also hot glued some Spanish moss and a couple tiny pumpkins around the base of the branches. To create a spider web, I applied hot glue on an old metal lid. I didn't worry about the design being perfect. When the hot glue was cool, I scraped it off using a flat razor blade. I think it would have come off easier if the lid had not been painted. I used a tiny bit of hot glue to attach the web in the tree branches, and then I cut off any loose pieces. I think this is a fun piece of art, and it was fun to make. And it was super cheap. It didn't cost me anything because I used things that I had on hand. Even if you had to buy a couple things, it shouldn't cost you more than a few dollars. For the next project, in addition to your empty frame, you'll need some jute twine and a circular ring of some sort. I used a notebook ring. Cut several strands of your jute twine longer than the length of your frame. Take a length of twine and fold it in half. Put the looped end through your ring and then pull the loose ends through the loop, catching the ring in between. Continue this process until the ring is completely covered with the twine. Put the ring in your empty frame and begin taping the ends of the twine to the back side of your frame. Once you have the twine evenly spaced around the back side of your frame, then you can begin stapling it to the frame. Carefully pull each piece taut before stapling. Trim off any extra twine and pull off your tape, and you're done. This is another super cheap project that should only cost you a couple dollars to make. I think I'll have to make a second one because I've been wondering how it would look if I added some beads to the twine before I stapled them in place. I found this crusty vent cover at the Habitat Restore for under $1. Unfortunately, the screws were painted in place, so I had to use my angle grinder to get the back portion off. I decided to super glue the top of the screws back in place. A portion of the vent cover had been painted brown, which I didn't care for, so I dabbed on some ivory chalk paint to help it look more unified. I hunted through my stash of frames and found this barnwood frame that was the perfect size to use with my vent cover. After inserting the cover into the frame, I folded down the metal push points to hold it in place, but I wanted it to be even sturdier. So I cut some small dowel rods to fit in the back side of the frame. I put them along each edge of the vent cover and stapled them to the frame. For extra stability, I added super glue in the crack between the dowel rod and the frame. Originally, I had planned on hanging a small wreath in the center of the vent cover, but I just love the texture of the crusty vent cover, and so I just wired a very small bouquet in the corner instead. For the next project, you'll need a deep, boxy frame like those found on shadow boxes. Empty out the frame and then cut a small piece of wood that is slightly wider and longer than one side of your frame. Attach the piece of wood to the base of your frame. I used super glue and screws. Probably one or the other would be enough. Mark the center of the top of your frame, and then using super glue or wood glue, add a little decorative knob. Drill a small hole on the inside of the frame just under the decorative knob, and then screw an eye hook into the hole. At this point, you can paint or stain your frame in whatever color you like. I chose a light green chalk paint, which I lightly distressed and then applied an antiquing wax to. I don't know what I'm going to use when I run out of my Waverly antiquing wax. I decided to use this little basket that I had on hand, but you could easily create your own hanging basket using the plant chains from Dollar Tree. I used a little twine to hang the basket from the eye hook inside the frame, and then I wrapped a little strand of pip berries around the twine and down through the plant. I think this would also look super cute with a small live plant in the basket. I used my Cricut for this next project, but I do think that you could trace the shapes onto vinyl and cut them out with scissors. To begin, I cut out several birch tree shapes in the length of my selected frame. Arrange and attach 2 or 3 of the birch tree images to the sheet of glass from your picture frame. Then apply 2 or 3 birch tree images to a piece of plexiglass that is the same size as your picture frame glass. I took the plexi out of a very cheap poster frame. Cut out some small vinyl leaf shapes in colors that you like. Apply some of them to the sheet of glass and some to the plexi. Insert the sheet of glass first into your picture frame and then go around all of the edges with hot glue. This will not only help to hold your glass in place, but will also provide a cushion between the glass and the plexi. Make sure that both the glass and the plexi are perfectly clean before attaching the plexi into the frame. Fold down the original staples in the frame to hold the plexi in place, and then go around all of the edges again with another layer of hot glue. You could make this project using 2 sheets of glass instead of using 1 sheet of plexi. However, keep in mind that your finished product will be much heavier to hang. I think if I made this again, I would use 3 pieces of plexi because I think that 3rd layer would really add some extra dimension. For the next project, you're going to need a large branch or piece of driftwood. Find an empty frame and use a pencil to mark where you would like the piece of wood to go. I used my jigsaw to remove this piece of frame. You didn't see that coming, did you? Paint your frame in a tone of brown or green paint. Lightly distress it if you like, but don't apply wax. You'll see why in a minute. Use wood glue or super glue to attach the piece of wood to the opening in your frame. Sometimes sanding where the wood is going to touch the frame will help it to stick better. I added additional super glue along the edges to make sure that it stayed attached. Cut some wire tape to add some extra interest to the frame. I believe I got this tape at Hobby Lobby. Form the tape over and into the shape of your piece of wood, cutting it if necessary. Hot glue the metal tape into place. The glue will heat up the metal tape, so be careful when pressing it in place. Hot glue metal tape to all four sides of the front of your frame. Clean up any hot glue that's squished out from under the tape, and then paint the tape the same color as your frame. Distress it a bit and then apply a coat of antiquing wax, dabbing off the extra wax. While the wax is still wet, sprinkle cinnamon over the entire frame. Rub or brush off the excess cinnamon. You can apply a second coat of cinnamon if you want an even crustier, rustier look. I printed out an image of an oak tree and attached that to the top corner of the frame. I just love how the piece of wood actually looks like it's part of the frame rather than just sitting on the frame. I'll put a link for the tree image in the description box. Although using an empty frame as a wreath is not a new idea, it is one that I had never tried before, and I thought this large oval frame would be perfect for this project. I applied a couple coats of chalk paint to make it look a little less like plastic and hopefully a little more like painted wood. When the paint was dry, I distressed it a bit with a little sandpaper. I then made a bouquet out of some sunflowers that I had in my stash, which I then wired onto the frame. I also made a large bow and wired that onto the frame as well. I'll link my bow tying tutorial in the description box if you're interested. To add additional interest to the frame, I printed out these small banner-shaped letters which I hot glued to a piece of twine to create a small garland. I hot glued the first and last letters to the frame so that the garland would lay flat, and then I tied the loose ends of twine around the frame as well. I am really pleased with how this turned out, and I think it would be really easy to change up the banner and the flowers for other seasons and holidays. In fact, I think this frame would make a great Halloween wreath. When I took the vent cover apart, I had 4 rusty vent slats left and decided to use one of them in this next project. I found a frame in my stash that was the same width as the vent slat. I spray painted it green and distressed it a bit. I drilled a small hole at each end of the vent slat and then attached it across the middle of the frame using small nails. To cover the cardboard backing from the picture frame, I used a rug from Dollar Tree. I cut it to size and then just folded over the edges and hot glued them in place. I hot glued this fabric covered piece to another piece of cardboard that was cut to the size of the frame. I used a staple gun to attach the entire piece to the back of the frame. I added a small bunch of greenery and an old book. The crossbar holds them in place. Because you probably don't have an old vent slat to use, get creative. What could you use as your crossbar? Obviously, a piece of wood would work, but maybe you can come up with something even more creative. The red and green were feeling Christmassy, so I flipped the book over and decoupaged an old book image to the back. I always pick up those old barnwood frames anytime I see them at the thrift store, and I decided to add a shelf to this particular one. I have a couple pieces of tongue and groove barnwood in my garage, so I cut one piece down to fit the width of the frame. I used wood glue to attach the shelf across the bottom of the frame, and I let it dry for a few hours. Then I added a few wood screws across the bottom of the shelf for a more permanent hold. I applied a little antiquing wax along the fresh cuts of the barnwood to help them blend in better. Remember the stained doily I used to make a spider web? Well, I still have some left, and I cut a piece to fit across the back of the barnwood frame. I then stapled it in place. Be sure to keep your pattern lined up in a way that you like, and gently pull the doily taut as you staple it to the back of the frame. Trim off any excess doily and cover the cut edges with some packing tape to make sure that it doesn't come unraveled. You now have a small memo board. You can use small clothespins to attach notes to the doily. You can also put small decor or practical items on the little shelf. Do you have a saucer or a little plate that you love but don't know what to do with? Well, this is the project for you. Paint a frame in a color that coordinates with your plate. While the paint is drying, take a picture of the image on your plate and print it out so that it will fit inside your frame. Figure out where on the frame you would like to place your plate. Super glue a small piece of wood to the glass where the center of the plate will go. Then super glue the plate to the piece of wood. I decided to weave some ribbon through the openings in my plate. If you don't have openings, you could just hot glue a bow to your plate if you like. Although you can't see the piece of wood, I decided to paint the sides of it black just in case. As you know, I like a good plate gallery, but this is an alternative when you have just one special plate that you want to display. If that plate belonged to someone special, you could put their picture in the frame instead. Here's another project for one of those plastic round or oval frames. Find a piece of fabric in autumn colors that will fit inside your frame, and then paint it in a color that coordinates with your piece of fabric. I painted mine with 2 coats of brown chalk paint. Then I distressed it a bit and applied a coat of clear wax. Using the piece of glass from the frame as a template, I cut out my piece of fabric. I then folded over the edges and hot glued them to the back of the piece of glass. Then I hot glued the cardboard picture to the back of the glass, which will also help to hold the folded fabric in place. Finally, I reattached the back of the frame. I drilled a large hole in the center of one side of the frame and then inserted a stick from my yard. I hot glued some raffia and a few autumn leaves to the stem, and then I hot glued some Scrabble letters onto the fabric to spell out the word autumn. I think this makes a cute little pumpkin to hang on the wall or to prop up in a bookshelf behind some other autumn decor. I wish I had put some pillow stuffing behind the fabric so that it would stick out from the frame a little bit. For project number 12, you'll need one of those miniature crates from Dollar Tree. Super glue the crate to the bottom section of a 5x7 picture frame. I painted my frame and crate with 2 coats of chalk paint. When the paint was dry, I distressed it a little bit and then applied a thin coat of clear wax. Using the cardboard backing as a template, cut out a piece of foam board. Cover the foam board with a scrap of fabric, folding the edges over and hot gluing them down. Hot glue over the folded fabric and then attach the original cardboard backing. Put this fabric piece into the frame without the glass and fold down the original staples along the back to hold it in place. You can push thumbtacks into the fabric-covered foam board like a bulletin board, or just use the little crate as a basket to hold small items. If you have a bunch of small picture frames lying around, this next project is for you. You'll also need a long board or a cabinet door. I picked this one up at the Habitat Restore for $1. Paint your frames in coordinating colors, or all in the same color if you prefer. Choose a word and print out the individual letters of your word on pretty scrapbook paper. I had 4 frames, so I chose the word fall. Plan out the arrangement of your frames on your board or cabinet door, and then hot glue the frames directly to the board. In retrospect, I wish I had attached the frames with small strips of Velcro so that I could easily change out the letters in the frames for other seasons and holidays. Here's another idea for making use of multiple small frames. Find a hook or peg that you can hang things from. Once again, paint your frames in coordinating colors. I also chose to distress my frames and apply a little white wax to them. Measure your frames and print out images that look good with one another. I'll link the images that I used in the description box below. I was going to be hanging these frames, so I didn't want to use the glass. So to get a snug fit, I cut out pieces of foam board to fit in each of the frames, and then I used a glue stick to apply the images to the foam board. I drilled a small hole in the top of each frame and then screwed in a small eye hook. I decided to use this old Christmas ornament to make a little sign. I used Goof Off to remove the letters, and then on Canva I created a new word which I printed out and then decoupaged to the front of the ornament. I applied some white wax to my decorative wall hook so that it would coordinate better with my painted frames. I went ahead and hung my decorative hook on the wall and then began tying on the frames in staggered lengths that I thought looked appealing. This is another project where you could easily change out the images in the frames to go with your decor or the current holiday or season. We are finally to the last project, and if you are still with me, thank you so much. For this project, you'll need a small frame, a small piece of fabric, and a little pillow stuffing. Center your fabric and then your stuffing over your frame. Begin pushing the fabric and the stuffing through the opening in the frame until you create a nice sized bubble on the front side of the frame. Fold the extra fabric over onto the stuffing and hot glue it in place. Trim off any excess fabric as needed. Then take the cardboard backing from the frame and hot glue it back into place. Now you have a pincushion that is cute enough to leave sitting out on a shelf all the time. Well, I told you I had some different ideas in store for you today. I hope you enjoyed them. And did you guess which project I'm keeping? It's the crusty vent cover with the barnwood frame. I just love chippy paint and architectural salvage. Which one would you have kept? I'd love to know. Well, that's all for today. Until next Tuesday, bye-bye for now.